Hello, welcome to Hard Compound, an American take on F1. There is no race this weekend. Hungary is next week. We're still thinking about discussing and debating all that happened in Silverstone last week. So we've got a content-rich episode for our listeners. But first, son, what are you drinking?
Today I have Bikini Blonde by Maui Brewing Company, based in Maui, Hawaii. And it's a nice, light, crisp lager. And if you're in tropical island destination, it's definitely a beer you want to be drinking.
Awesome. That sounds very good. Mine's quite different. It is the Soft Parade Shandy. It's recommended highly from Shorts Brewery in, I believe, Elk Rapids, Michigan. Let's give this a try. A little sweeter than I'm used to, but a nice, refreshing taste. That would be a good picnic drink, I would say. I was reading a lot of articles, reading a lot of social media, not just about Silverstone, the race last week, but mostly about the Lewis and Max kerfuffle. Lewis hitting Max spinning out of the race, no points. Lewis takes the win. And most of the people I talked to, the fans, all felt Lewis was at fault. Most of the F1 media said it was up for debate. I suspect that's because most of the F1 media is still British. So I suspect there's a little bit of bias there. However, it also led me to reviewing the point standing and looking at the rest of the races for the year. And we see just how close Mercedes and Red Bull are. There's only a few points separating Max and Lewis, only a few points separating Red Bull and Mercedes. Even the numbers 3 and 4 team, McLaren and Ferrari, are distant, which got me to thinking, is Red Bull destined to be the only competitor to Mercedes? What do you think about that?
I think that's a good question, a relevant question, because it's been since 2009 since a team other than Mercedes or Red Bull won the Constructors' Championship. And I'm pretty sure every single one of those years, a driver from the team that won also won the Drivers' Championship. And, I think looking back at some of the winning margins for those two constructors since 2010, I think there's only been 3 times when the winning margin was less than 100 points to the next competitor, right? So for, 11, 12 years now, Mercedes and Red Bull have been pretty dominant constructors. And, once again, we have those two teams at the top. I think for a couple of years, Ferrari and Vettel put up kind of a good fight against Mercedes, right? We saw Vettel at the halfway point in 2017, I think, or maybe 2018. He was ahead of Hamilton in the driver's standings, but only by a few points, like Max is now. But ultimately, right, we saw Ferrari falter in the second half of the season. Mercedes just has too much going for them. And they have so much money that they can throw into performance enhancements throughout the season that, it's going to be hard for anybody to seriously compete with them. So You look at the next team, right, and Red Bull, and you're thinking, okay, maybe they have a shot because they, in my opinion, are the only other team who can realistically or reasonably kind of compete spending wise with Mercedes. So
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a valid point. As you say, it's been a decade of Mercedes and Red Bull. It's been great to watch Ferrari improve race over race this year and from last year. And it's just been such a joy to watch McLaren, maybe my favorite team, rise from the ashes. Only a few years ago, you and I would sit and watch the races and wonder if McLaren would even finish. Sometimes wonder if they would even start. But it does seem as if even McLaren and Ferrari are destined for 3 and 4th on the grid in the Constructors' Championship. I hope, though, because starting next year, there's going to be a spending cap. It's a loose spending cap, unlike, say, the NFL in the US, which has a very strict spending cap. The F1 team spending cap will be a lot looser. There's more room to play. But I think it does boost the potential of the lesser teams. Plus, there's always the potential of the poor, scrappier teams, the Williams, the Haas's, for example, of being able to compete when the playing field is relatively level. Mercedes and Red Bull, and to some extent Ferrari, they may have gotten a little soft and fat. We don't know. They spend a fortune. Mercedes and Red Bull, it's rumored that they're spending sometimes close to $500 million a year. And if that goes down to, say, 200 million next year, that's a lot that's getting cut. The scrappier teams like Haas that know how to compete for 100 million, they may actually get a bigger boost than we think from these spending caps. But I do agree that it's been so long with Red Bull and Mercedes dominating the sport that it's hard to see anyone else unseating them.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned the cost cap, and because I was looking into that too, and I think right now it's set at something like $175 million in a calendar year for performance. And that's kind of what you were talking about, is why that's kind of a loose cap, because certain things count towards performance and a lot of things don't. So Mercedes and Red Bull can throw $175 million directly into performance, and then whatever the hell else they want to and all this other stuff, that all these other teams, they don't have that kind of money. They have to make a budget, and maybe all of their spending comes to $175 million.
Right.
So only a portion of that, 3/4 of that, say, is going to improving the performance of their car.
Right. Well, speaking of money, and speaking of Red Bull, I actually was reviewing the sort of rumored salaries of the drivers. Lewis is bringing in around 60 million a year expected. I think Max around 40 million, Alonso around 20 to 30 million. Vettel is up there as well. And as we know, many of the teams are owned by billionaires. One of the things that struck me, and I know you've remarked on this as well, are not just that Red Bull sponsors its own team and sort of has the AlphaTauri as its B team, but energy drinks are such a dominant present in F1 and in racing in general. When I think of the drink Red Bull, it's not something I've ever tried. I have no interest in it. It's not something I would have ever considered as a business, making a soft drink, putting in various vitamins and so forth in it, or whatever's inside of a Red Bull, and then sort of building that brand, building global distribution. The owner of Red Bull, he has certainly earned his billions. But I do kick myself over one of McLaren's new major sponsors, which I believe is Husker Chocolate, which is chocolate milk fortified with various vitamins and other supplements. That is such an obvious idea. I kick myself over not coming up with the idea. The tough work of building a brand and building distribution, that all can be done. You just need to put in the time. But what a great idea. It got us sort of talking about what is it with energy drinks? Is that sort of a natural sponsorship for F1, a natural sponsorship for racing? So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny kind of looking at sponsorships over, say, the last 20 to 30 years, because you used to see a ton of tobacco sponsorships. And I think those have all been kind of replaced by energy drinks, whatever they may be, Red Bull or Monster, as you were mentioning, Husky Chocolate.
Husky.
Yeah, they're kind of these massive brands that everybody knows about. And I don't know if I know anybody that regularly drinks any of them, but they're huge. They sponsor a ton of teams and events in motorsport. And you kind of wonder if that's the direction that the sport is heading. Like, will, say, Monster become a title sponsor or even a part owner of one of these faltering teams, say Haas, and kind of bring them into contention with the likes of Red Bull?
Yeah.
We saw, like, in Drive to Survive, they have the saga of like Rich Energy and Haas, that sponsorship, and you wonder like how many more of these ridiculous energy drink companies will kind of make sham sponsorships. But it seems like that's the direction the sport is heading.
Right. I was first introduced to F1 as a wee lad when I got to see Wide World of Sports on Saturday mornings, but I didn't really get into it until the 80s and 90s, and I believe it may have been Benetton as a sponsor, but Marlboro, the cigarette brands, were heavy into all sports. Obviously, Schumacher, Marlboro, that's sort of an iconic livery, for example. So it is sort of interesting to see sort of the trends in sponsorship. In American sports, American-based sports, beer is always sort of front and center as an advertisement. Beer ads sort of probably dominate NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA. But, you know, I have no problem with beer companies sponsoring F1 or racing, but obviously there's probably going to be a little bit of a shaming factor because of the drink and drive. Like we see Nico Rosberg now promoting a non-alcoholic Heineken, for example. So there's some limitations. I do think, this was your idea, and I do think that energy drinks, including an energy chocolate milk drink, are natural sponsorships for F1. The other topic I wanted to talk about was, we're discussing not just F1, but American sports, popular American sports. I'd like to make F1 more popular in the US. It's not as popular as NASCAR, certainly. It's not as popular as Indy, although it's growing. The Silverstone race got decent ratings for ESPN. Monaco always does reasonably well. But that's about it. So I wanted to get, what are some of your thoughts on sort of growing the fan base, particularly in the US, not just for folks like us, but just for the casual fan even. There's casual fans for hockey, for basketball, for football. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how we can sort of bring them into the fold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I have a lot of thoughts on that because I'm always trying to get people more interested in the sport, in sports that I like, because it's kind of always more fun watching a team or a driver and cheering for whomever with other people, or to have kind of friendly rivalries and banter. So I'm always looking to kind of get people into the sport, and then thinking of ways that the sport can be more interesting to people, I guess. So a couple of the things that we've seen recently are like the sprint qualifying. I think more racing is like more enjoyable to more people. But there's kind of that crowd of people that isn't as excited about the sprint qualifying. I think because they believe that it makes the actual qualifying kind of less interesting because it doesn't really matter a whole lot. So that got me kind of thinking like, well, what can F1 do to make those kinds of things matter more? And you look at F2, and they have a reverse grid where basically they qualify one day, do a sprint race, one sprint race where the winners, or I guess like the top 10, then is reversed for another sprint race. And then you go ahead into the full race on Sunday or whenever it happens, right? And, I just think the reverse grid is kind of a cool way to see a lot of racing and you get a lot more action because you have some of the, I guess, better or faster cars, better drivers, faster drivers, actually muddled in with the rest of the pack. So you get to see some good battles,
Yeah.
which I always think is fun. And I think it is interesting to more people.
Yeah, I sometimes watch the F2. Those are fun. The sprints, the qualifying, the reverse grid. I love the sprint at Silverstone. Not sure I think they should do it every week, but I do think they should do it at least several times a season. You know, these F1 cars, I mean, they're beasts, but they're delicate beasts. I'm not sure having them do what the cars do in F2 would give us ultimately the best Sunday racing. But I do love that idea. Some of the other ideas that I know we've discussed in the past, for example, here in Detroit, they have an Indy race on Belle Isle, and they have a Saturday race and a Sunday race. They're both full races, full points, and they do that in a few of the tracks, I believe. I think Montreal Indy might do that, or Toronto Indy. What do you think? You think that something like that might work?
I do. I think it would get a lot of people interested, would reach a lot more people. I don't know how the drivers or teams would feel about doing 2 full races in a weekend, but I think it would be a lot of fun for people to watch 2 full races and see kind of how everybody stacks up over the whole weekend. And a lot of points can be gained in one weekend, right? If you do well in both races and maybe your rival doesn't do so well, that can be a lot of fun to watch.
Right. I was just got a text here that said the Australia race, Melbourne, I believe, was canceled. There's concerns that at least one other race scheduled this season might be canceled, and they're looking at alternatives like Qatar. One of the suggestions, though, apparently, is that considering having 2 races in Austin, it wouldn't be one race Saturday, one race Sunday, but over 2 weekends. I think that could work.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that we had talked about how Indy and NASCAR are seemingly more popular in the US. And I think that has to do a lot with the fact that there are more races in each of those two in the States than there are of F1. And that's kind of naturally how F1 is structured. Of course, they're not going to do a 20 race season all across the States, but having more races in the country and in kind of close proximity to the country, I think would interest a lot more people here. And I think, having 2 races in Austin this year and then, looking to the future, we've got Miami and Austin next year. I think that is going to be really big and a really solid boost to growing fandom in the States.
Yeah, if we have Austin, if we have Miami, if Montreal gets back onto the F1 slate, they've missed the last 2 years in a row. Mexico, I think that's really going to help. So that'll be fun to see. We have a segment called What's Wrong With and What's Right With. What's right with Miami? Because when I heard they were going to do an F1 in Miami, I thought, well, that's just the absolute perfect location in the US to have an F1. And I believe the billionaire owner of the Miami Dolphins is the one sort of behind the push. So I'm really looking forward to that. What do you think of the Miami F1 in 2022?
Well, I'm pretty sure we have been discussing what would be better locations to hold a USGP than Austin, because while Austin and Coda are awesome, they are not. I don't think they really scream F1, and I don't necessarily know that Austin is really the ideal place. So, we were brainstorming where a good F1 circuit would be, and we basically came up with 2 options, Vegas and Miami. And lo and behold, like 2 years later, F1 announces a 10-year deal to hold a Miami Grand Prix. which I think is incredible. Like you were saying, it's pretty much the ideal location to hold an F1 race.
Yeah,
It's Party City, USA. It's glamorous. It's everything that you hope F1 can be. And,
right.
and so, I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be just an awesome weekend. And I think so many American fans are going to become real longtime F1 fans because of that race.
Yeah, I totally agree. No disrespect to Austin, but Austin is America's biggest city in the middle of nowhere. It's like if Winnipeg was cool. It's not easy to get to. There's nothing else near it. It's fun. It's a bit of a hipster town, but it doesn't scream F1. Miami, with the beach, with the glamour, with the US and Latin American media, with all the big sports names that live down there. As you said, it's Party City, USA. I think, with the possible exception of Las Vegas, there is no better place to put on an F1 race in the US. And I actually think it's a better place than Las Vegas. I just think there's more sort of wild, reckless abandon. It's going to get so much more attention. So many more young people are going to go down there, are going to watch that race. I hope it becomes a sort of a regular slate in the F1 season. I'd love to see that. And I just sort of am curious to see how the cars run down there in that heat. But that reminds me, I just sort of coincidentally, before the show started, was looking at older races, and there was, from 40 years ago, the last F1 race in the 1981 season, the Caesars Palace Grand Prix in Las Vegas. It was, I don't know, probably close to 100 degrees, but it was covered by Murray Walker, the famous F1 broadcaster, British broadcaster. And it was won by Nelson Piquet. It was a Ford engine, which was awesome to see. I think the winner of the race was Williams. I don't recall who that was, but it was the season-ending race, and sort of Nelson Piquet won the championship. And like I said, a Ford engine, it would be so awesome if Ford got back into F1. I just thought that was funny. An actual Las Vegas race from 1981.
Agreed. Yeah. I think you sent me a link to a YouTube video of it last night, and I watched that. I was like, this is incredible. Being in Vegas in that heat, I bet, was just atrocious on those tires. But it was a fun race to watch. It was the end of the F1 calendar for 1981. And Nelson Piquet won the Drivers' Championship in that race by 1 point over Reutemann, which, you think about it now, and Hamilton over the last 4 years has won by, I don't even know how many points every year. So it was a close fight, which is, makes it all the more exciting. And yeah, Alan Jones, the Australian, won his 12th and final Grand Prix in the Williams Ford. So like you said, just a Ford on top was really cool to see, and seeing a Williams on top was cool to see as well. So it was definitely a cool race.
Yeah, for me, it was just sort of fun, interesting to see a race in Las Vegas. As you said, Williams Ford, Murray Walker calling the race, Ford engine winning, and Nelson Piquet getting the championship. And as you said, just barely by 1 point. So what a great race. I'd love something like that to happen in Miami. I don't think it needs to be, because as we said, I think Miami is just a natural home for an F1 race. So really looking forward to that. Next topic, best. For this episode, I thought best team friendship. I was watching some social media by the various teams. They each put out their own social media there. Some even have their own shows, pre-race and post-race. And it's funny to see the chemistry or lack thereof between the drivers. The teams obviously want to promote the drivers, the camaraderie, but it's usually just not there. Alonso probably isn't being mean to Ocon. He just doesn't care about Ocon. Hamilton clearly looks down on Bottas. Russell has no time for Latifi. He's eyeing the Mercedes. Kimi Räikkönen does not care who his teammate is. I'm sure Giovinazzi's a fine fellow. Kimi Räikkönen does not care. Vettel probably does not care about Stroll, his teammate. And I was just sort of trying to watch and make assumptions about the team dynamic. You think Ricciardo really believes he should be the number one driver, but Lando is regularly outracing him. Sainz probably thinks he deserves to be the number one at Ferrari. Leclerc has been regularly outracing him. So there's a lot of issues. Max, as we said, he's just a beast. He's focused solely on winning. It doesn't matter, I think, who his teammate is. And Perez, I think, is just sort of happy to be there right now. But where you notice just so much fun, natural chemistry is between Gasly and Yuki. He's French. Yuki's Japanese. They're both young drivers. They're both in AlphaTauri, the Red Bull B team. Who knows where they'll be next year? I'm not sure Gasly will be back at AlphaTauri next year, but they seem to genuinely get along well and have really good chemistry. So I wondered what your thoughts were on sort of the team dynamics and who you think has the best or most real friendship amongst the teams.
It's funny because I don't usually pay much attention to sort of driver dynamics off of the track. So, but I regularly see kind of Gasly and Yuki doing things together and like just constantly giggling or making jokes or whatever. And it's like genuinely fun and enjoyable to watch their dynamic. And I think, there are other teams where their drivers are generally really nice and enjoyable and seem like they're probably pretty easy to get along with. You think of McLaren right now, Lando and Ricciardo. I'm sure they get along well and are probably don't get too upset with each other most of the time, but there's an age gap there and it seems like it's not the same kind of friendship that Gasly and Yuki have. It's just a fun kind of quirky little thing to check out.
Yeah. So Yuki was the only Red Bull driver last week to get a point. Next week they're in Hungary. I'm not expecting that to happen. I'm expecting a different outcome. What are your thoughts on next week's race in Hungary?
Hungary's always pretty fun, I think, at the Hungaroring in Budapest. It's a cool race. It's a fun race. I think that tire wear is probably going to be an issue. And I think it's usually a high downforce track. So we'll see what happens. I imagine Gasly's going to come back and get in the points. So, I don't think Yuki's going to be the only AlphaTauri in the points or Red Bull kind of team that's going to get in the points. I imagine Max will get in there if he doesn't get taken out again. So, yeah, I think it could definitely be a good day for the Red Bull team as a whole.
Yeah. As a Gen Xer, Budapest is my North Star. We were all required to go visit there and summer there and backpack there. But the race each year is usually not one of my favorites. I love Portugal, Barcelona, Baku. I love the start at Melbourne. We've been to Montreal. That's great. So I'm just going to sit back, have my beverage, and enjoy that race. I don't really have any sort of bold predictions, but I did think this was a good time for us to roll out our new feature, which we're going to call, at least for now, Across the Line. You and I are going to make our bets on who we think will win, what we think the podium will be, and choose our top 5 for the race. And we'll do this for each race. We'll draft 5 drivers each. And once a driver is taken off the board, that's it. No one else can take them. 1 point awarded if that driver finishes in the top 5. 3 points if they finish in the exact he was drafted. So why don't you go first? You pick your first and I'll pick mine.
Okay. All right. So my pick number 1, who I think is going to come in first place, is Max Verstappen.
Oh, nice. Nice. Well, for me, I'm going to have a bit of a curveball here. I'm going with Valtteri Bottas is number 1. So who's your number 2?
Oh, interesting. Okay. So last week I said I expected, or my crazy prediction was a Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren podium. So I'm going to stick true to that. I'm going to take Norris as my number 2.
Nice. Nice. Then I will take Lewis. Hamilton is my number 2. How about I go third and fourth?
Oh, damn. Okay.
So, so number 3, Leclerc. Who do you got?
Well, that's just rude. I'm going to continue, though, and go with Sainz.
Ah, nice. I will next, number 4, fourth place, just missing out on the podium, Checo Perez.
I am going to take... Ooh, this is a tough one. I think I'm going to go with Ricciardo.
Wow. So you've got McLaren doing very well in Hungary. We'll see. Why don't you go 5th?
All right. As my 5th driver, I'm going to go and... this is actually a tough one. It's kind of a toss-up for me, but I'm going to go with Fernando Alonso.
Oh, curses. That's who I had. So for my 5th, let's see. I can't take anyone that you've picked. So who do I think? We've got Ferrari, we've got Red Bull, we've got Mercedes, we've got McLaren, you've got Alpine with Alonso. Well, let's have each of our number 5s be the old men. I'm going with Sebastian Vettel. Nice points for Aston Martin there if that comes true. So that's great. So you have Verstappen, Norris, Sainz, Ricciardo, and Alonso. I have Bottas, Lewis, Leclerc, Perez, and Vettel. We'll tally it up for next week's race, and we'll keep track for the rest of the season. I think this is going to be real fun, and we'll post the results so our listeners can also sort of participate in that. Any crazy predictions for next week's race?
You know, I like the Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren podium, so I'm going to go with another one and say that all 4 of the Red Bull associated cars get into points.
Wow. I think that's bold, but very possible. My crazy prediction is in 9th place. His first point for Williams, George Russell.
Nice.
Right. So we'll see how that one goes. I'm looking forward to the race, but that's it. I want to thank everyone for listening, and we are lights out.